Do you want to attract more of your ideal clients and book more weddings? Well, today's episode is sponsored by Book More Weddings Summit, and I vet every sponsor exhaustively and totally endorse this conference, which is free if you mention my name. The Book More Weddings Summit is happening August 22nd to August 26th, and in a little while, I'll tell you more about it. In the meantime, you can go ahead now and sign up for your free ticket by typing in bookmoreweddingssummit.com/Andy. That's bookmoreweddingssummit.com/Andy. You're listening to the Wedding Biz Network, the voice of the creative entrepreneur. Hey everyone, it's Andy Kushner with The Wedding Biz, and today I'm excited to present a revisit of my original interview of Rishi Patel in 2019. Rishi is CEO of HMR Designs, a premier event design and production firm based out of Chicago. He's designed events for President Obama and Fortune 500 companies, among many other discerning clients and celebrities alike. Rishi rose to become CEO with over 100 employees in just 7 or 8 years from when he first joined, and is still relatively young. I've also heard him speak at Engage several times. He's a very compelling speaker. Enjoy this conversation with Rishi Patel. So Rishi, man, it's so exciting to have you on the show. There have been at least 2 or 3 people who, including Debbie Geller, who was saying, you got to sit down with Rishi, man, you got to get him on the mic. So this is cool.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm really excited for my first podcast, I guess.
Yeah, well, hey, I love that I'm the first. That's awesome. Well, yeah, I was thinking about all you do. I've heard you speak before at Engage, and, so I've got a lot of good stuff to talk about. But, I was also looking at your website, and one of the first things that occurred to me is that there's a quote there, which, I would guess is really the backbone of everything you do philosophically. And what it says is that you are HMR Designs, and you are an advocate for fully transformative design, and that you believe that service is luxury. I love that. Can you say a little bit more about why you feel service is a luxury and also transformative design?
Absolutely. So I guess I'll start with kind of, something that's fully immersive in terms of design. We started, actually this year marks our 40th anniversary of being in business, which is pretty amazing. And when we started 40 years ago, we started as a very simple floral company. And through the years, we've kind of evolved and developed in-house capabilities far past just floral, even though floral is still our backbone. So now we do full in-house art and graphics. We have an entire fabric team that can create custom fabric panels or upholstery, a wood shop, a welding shop, and 110,000 square feet of props and amazing, decor items that we've collected and created through the years. But that didn't happen just for no reason. It happened organically and for a reason to be able to almost control every visual amazing element. There is one thing that we do absolutely design and are very knowledgeable in, but we don't produce, which is lighting. But we generally work with some of our great partners who do produce the lighting for us, and we design it out because I think that is also a very important part of the visual aesthetic and feeling that we always are trying to create no matter what type of event. So I think that's kind of why we are really into transformative design and something that's immersive and really captures and touches all the senses.
And service being a luxury. I love that phrase.
Yeah. So service being a luxury kind of started when we were just a floral company. We were obviously much more boutique than we are now, but we never wanted to let our clients feel different. We didn't want them to feel that they're walking into 110,000 square foot facility where they are one of a million instead of one of 10. And service and on our end is always the most important. We want not only the day of to be amazing, but we want the entire experience from the first time they come through our doors to every other meeting that we have and every interaction that we have with them to be amazing. We want them to leave saying, you know what, not only was the product amazing, but we had such a good time and such a great experience working with X, Y, and Z, whoever it is at our company through the process of design, because it's, we're in it for the long haul and we hope our clients are too with us. And we believe that nothing of good luxury comes without great service.
Yeah. And it's interesting, a lot of the people that I talked to on this show, I figured out pretty quickly, even if they didn't spell it out like that, simply the process of a client, working with the team, whoever it is, whether it's a cake designer, planner, designer, photographer, whatever, that in itself is an experience, and it's not just the end. It's not just the big night, but I mean, in many cases, right, even if it's corporate, I mean, it's probably at least a couple months and up to maybe even a year, especially a wedding. And so, yeah, I think the whole thing is really an experience. So to look at service as a luxury and that there's touch points every moment, right? I think that's critical.
Absolutely. And, I think the biggest thing is that it's a very emotional process. Even, we do a really good amount of corporate events, but are mostly, I would say 50 to 60% of our business is comprised of private and social events, which is very emotional. And, the emotions do take on a whole nother level of its own, but that also makes ourselves and our clients more vulnerable at times to really develop those relationships that are going to last a lifetime.
Yeah. Well, you know what, Rishi, I want to take a moment. I want to go back because I also remember during one of your talks hearing about your career trajectory, which was very interesting, Yeah. And so I want to cover that. And I know that, from that story, you started in finance and accounting. But even before that, like when you were growing up, was there anything that maybe pointed to where you are now in terms of your passion in event design and planning? Did anything manifest when you were growing up?
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting question. So I remember very clearly, I believe it was my sophomore year in high school, going to get a corsage for my date at the time. And my mother sent me to a really nice local flower shop in downtown Wheaton, where I grew up, which is right outside the city of Chicago. And I went in and, placed my order, and I saw they had a sign saying, hiring part-time. And I've always been an artist all my life. So I love painting, drawing, all of that, and still do to this day. Just wish I had more time to do it. But through that, I was like, this could be very interesting to have a job in something that's fun and creative and make money at the time, being a sophomore. So I actually started working there as, the greens boy. I would green up arrangements. I would make boutonnieres really from the bottom, and started to figure out what floral design was, and ended up working there through high school, and then ended up actually coming back my first couple of years of college during breaks and things, and working on weddings and parties during the summertime. So kind of got my foot into events and floral that way, and then slowly has started to develop.
But did you not think about it as a potential career back then?
Never. And I never even, ironically, I was in it, but never thought that this could be a career or something that I even wanted to do.
Yeah.
Until being at Goldman Sachs as an investment banker for 2.5 years really showed me that.
Wait, Rishi, wait a minute. You mentioned that you had done finance and accounting, but you were at Goldman Sachs? That's where you were?
I was an investment banker for 2.5 years and absolutely hated it. And it wasn't my cup of tea. And, it was at the time, I did enjoy the work. It was the ability to not be creative. And while I was studying finance and accounting through college, and even when I was getting my MBA, I still had the outlets and the ability to be able to exert my creativity in some way. So what happened, obviously, I graduated right during the recession. And
from where, by the way? What college?
I went to Indiana University for both.
All right. So that's a pretty good place. All right.
Yeah. I was in the Cal School of Business. And after I graduated, most finance and accounting companies were pretty much skin and bones due to the economy.
Yeah.
So because of that, we were working an insane amount of hours and really didn't have much time for myself or to be creative. And I think that was really a downfall for me. And I really ended up leaving and knowing that I needed to pursue something more creative that was going to be just more interesting for me.
But when you left, didn't you say, if I remember correctly, you quit cold turkey and then took off traveling? Isn't that right?
Yeah, that's correct. You have a great memory. Yeah. So I actually, because it was the recession, I was starting to interview and look around while I was still in banking. I started looking at marketing agencies, advertising firms, and then came up to this world of event design, obviously knowing that I had a floral background and was pretty good at it. I just thought, let me check this out. And at the time, I had actually interviewed at HMR and they didn't have any full-time positions for me. So for me to leave my job and work part-time or as a freelancer didn't make much sense. So, I had just said, okay, I totally understand and appreciate it. But at one point, I think it was February of 2010, I had just had enough with banking. So I quit cold turkey and booked a one-way flight and went to Europe and Asia and was just traveling around. And
wait a minute, a one-way flight. So you had no thoughts as to when you would come back? You just went?
Literally. Yeah. And I think after having less than 10 days of vacation in 2 years.
In a corporate, right.
I was just so burnt out and I needed to just kind of do a little soul searching and find myself and see the world. So I decided to, and luckily I'm grateful I did, because I could never do that now. But, I did book a one-way flight, went to Europe and Asia, India. And when I came back.
Wait, how long though? How long were you away?
I was gone for about 2 months.
Wow. That's significant. And you're basically like, what, 22 or something? Or 23 at the time?
I know at the time I was 25.
Wow. Okay. You really took a risk. Where do you think that courage came from to just go like that? I mean, how did you feel when you did this?
I think it was just kind of the excitement of like, okay, I'm done with this. I have a lull in my career. I don't know what I'm going to do. Meanwhile, let you know that my parents being Indian and were freaking out that, hey, you're leaving this amazing career where people are getting fired or laid off because of the economy. You're quitting without a job and going to Europe to travel. Have you lost your mind? And maybe I did, and I think that was kind of
No, I think you found your mind is what I would say.
Yeah. And I think actually I agree. But yeah, so I came back. I ended up coming back to the US when I came back home. At the time, back in 2010, it wasn't that you'd keep your phone on when you were abroad. Wi-Fi wasn't really that big of a thing, and it wasn't as accessible, especially via voicemails. So I turned my phone back on when I landed and had a voicemail from HMR to come in for an interview, and then came in, started.
And Rishi, so before we go on though, I mean, this is significant. The age of 25, the risk, the courage that you took to do it. Again, you're not enjoying the job. It sounds like you're probably making some good money. You're working a ton of hours. You take off. You don't know when you're coming back. You come back after 2 months of what must have been an incredible, outrageous, experience. What do you feel, before we go on, like, what do you feel you learned from going by yourself and traveling to different countries for 2 months and then coming back? What do you feel you came back with that really helped you moving forward?
It was funny because while I was in finance, I did travel a good amount with my team and other clients and colleagues. And when I was traveling, it was interesting because you'd travel and almost, when I was traveling with finance individuals, you would see the world in a very different way. It was, where can we go eat? Where are we going to go party? Oh, that's cool. Look at this here. Look at that there. It wasn't so much the way I see things. And I think that was a really eye-opening experience for me, because when I was traveling on my own, I was completely immersed in the culture and so inspired by almost anything I would see, which was just such a different way of traveling that I had known for 2.5 years. So, going out there and seeing things and just really being there, not with a time limit or not with a project in mind, just to kind of explore, was just, it was a great deal of soul searching and just kind of finding inspiration everywhere. So it was probably the most inspirational trip, but just such a different way of traveling that I was used to.
It's interesting. I've said this on the show before. I love to travel too. And it was only like 2 years ago, I took 5 weeks and I went to Maui, and I was able to set it up such that I barely had to work for that 5-week period of time. And I did have a return ticket. I knew when I was coming back, and it was on an island, which is kind of different. But on the other hand, it changed my life. Like, the whole idea for this podcast came from opening up that space to be able to really feel and to get, like, for me, getting grounded, to me, it felt like the planet, the ocean and the mountains, and to be able to meet people and make friends and just, have this empty space, which was very, very scary. But to me, it's like you say, it was the most inspiring thing I've ever done. I feel like if only everybody could have a time like that.
Yeah. And I think, I absolutely agree. I think that finding that time is really hard, but sometimes when you're at a crossroad like that in your career, or having a midlife crisis or mid-millennial crisis, whatever you want to call it, I think that is always a very interesting turning point where I do encourage anybody to go out there and find themselves. And if that means going to the other side of the world to do it, then I think it's well worth it.
Yeah. Or just a change of scenery. So when you come then to HMR, what is the position that you began in?
So I began as like a senior event designer, so selling and designing parties, which is not much different than what I do now as part of my job, but I was just solely focused on doing that and really started working and building my book of business. I was given a couple accounts and a couple, cold leads, but really just networking and hustling. And I was out at industry events 2 to 3 times a week minimum, on top of working, Monday through Friday. And then obviously when we had parties and events on Saturdays, I'd be out working a ton. So I was just really focused on creating a book of business and creating almost a brand of myself within the company when I first started.
And I want to come back to the brand in a second. I also remember when you spoke that you said something about how you're really here now. And we're going to get to this in a minute. I mean, my God, I didn't know it was 2010, 8 years, you become president of a major company with over 100 employees. I mean, I want to get to that. But I remember you saying that you got here where you are because of your network. And you just now mentioned, networking at least 2 or 3 times a week out there. Can you say something about that? How did you view networking? Did you have some particular philosophy, techniques about it, if it made that much of a difference in your career?
Yeah, I mean, I think networking was such a huge thing that I was very open to and I loved doing from business, when I was in business school and going, and that was just part of life. And I think when coming into this industry, obviously we know that this industry is very small, even though it seems very big, it's very small. And especially in the luxury world, it's even smaller. And coming into this, knowing that I wanted to do great, amazing parties and events and design really fun things, I knew I needed to know who those major players were. And while they had, recognition to our brand, they didn't have recognition to me. And if I wanted to be that person doing these events and parties, I needed to get in front of them and figure out a way to, meet them. And a lot of times, I sent lots of emails to planners who are dear friends of mine now, or that I still don't work with, but I've planners and venues and all these people who didn't know who I was, and many times you wouldn't even get a response. But when you saw them in person at an event or at a networking event or whatnot, it really made a difference, and I was able to establish that connection.
What kind of things would you say in the email? A lot of people it's very hard to cold call for a lot of people and to grab attention. And I understand you didn't always get a response, but still maybe they remembered and it would trigger, a memory when they saw you. Do you remember what you would basically say in that cold call email?
If I were to write one today, I feel like it would have been very similar to what I would have wrote then, but it would probably somewhat be, hi, and at the time I was new to the company. So I would probably have introduced myself and say, I just joined HMR, would love to meet with you. Obviously if a client comes by, we'd love to work with you too, but I'd like to sit down and grab coffee with you or grab lunch with you or have you into our studio. So at least I can, show you around or even explain to you my design aesthetic, where I come from, and love to get to know you. At the time, now I feel like if I were to get an email like that, I would probably not have time to respond to it either, which is ironic. But, I do really appreciate all of those. There's so many amazing people.
And it also puts your name out there, because I think that part of it too, it's like we don't always know, right? If we're advertising in a particular event publication or we've been on a podcast like this, we don't really know where people are hearing about us, but they're hearing about us. I think there's something to that too. Maybe they don't exactly lock in, oh, that guy sent me this email, but your name is familiar. I think that all of that adds up.
Right. 100%. And, I was lucky enough to start from the mid-sized weddings and grow to pretty large events quickly. I think as I started doing a couple events here and there, my name and my work started getting out. And I've always been a pretty strong proponent and believer in social media. So I always use that, to my knowledge, because I knew if there was any way to spread my work or my name, it was via social media, at least to share with the masses kind of my perspective and my design aesthetic.
Do you have any tips about that right there? Because this is interesting. This is coming up with some recent guests who are I interviewed Kiana Underwood. I'm going to be releasing that within a week. Incredible. And it's interesting. Some people don't know who she is yet. She has over 300,000 Instagram followers. And she was talking about how it is Instagram and, tips, how she did it and the advice that she got that made an enormous difference in her career. And then there's another planner who I just released today who also said that it was, I think she had known Jose Villa, who gave her a bunch of tips and it made a big difference for her. Is there any particular way that you use social media that you feel was able to really message your brand that effectively to get you up? Because you are known. I mean, you've got a great brand, a great reputation. How did you do that with social media? Anything in particular?
First of all, thank you. Yes, I do. I mean, as of recent, being so kind of inundated this first quarter with events, I've been very inactively posting on my personal page. But so what we ended up doing is we have HMR Designs, which is growing really well and has a great traction and lots of great followers and users. But I did create my own, site, because we do have a team of 8 amazing designers here at HMR who, design everything. We have a team of designers who do private social. We have a team of designers who do corporate. And, there is lots of different perspectives. And it's kind of this amazing talent pool, because one personality or one aesthetic isn't right for everybody. And we've really been able to have this amazing team of designers to kind of step in and, fill so many different needs and wants and aesthetic styles. So I created my own personal Instagram page to showcase my work specifically very long before, I think I actually had an Instagram page before I started HMR's Instagram page. But what we've realized this today, and there's so much that happens on Instagram, it's unbelievable. Even past clients, current clients, new prospective clients, we booked some amazing events just blindly via Instagram because I think, again, our work speaks for itself. I do think that there are vendors in other situations where it's very unclear as to who's doing this work. Is it your work? Are you reposting other people's work? And that I think definitely becomes tricky because I've been on events where there's certain vendors, on the team that, as a designer, I'm not necessarily at the helm of picking all and choosing all these vendors or directing clients to choose them because I'm not a planner. But many times we will be on teams and I see a handful of individuals who I've never worked with, which is really exciting. And I go to their Instagram page and I'm like, oh my God, they have 50,000 followers or 70,000 followers. And the experience or the final product after the perspective leaves a lot to be desired, I guess, So there are people who've grown very large, and whether that's purchasing new clients or just, showcasing a very specific style that might not really morph well in a ballroom in Chicago. I think that is kind of an interesting turn that social media has taken. But I do think for a lot of us who do showcase our real work and, I think what you see is what you get, I think it's been an extraordinary way to market. And almost we've kind of turned off all of our other marketing initiatives in terms of budgeting and dollars spent towards print ads or other, web ads, and really just focused our efforts to social media.
Well, I want to go for a moment in another direction, and then I still want to come back to, your career trajectory, because that's a whole nother interesting story. But I read somewhere, I don't know if it was an article or where I saw it, but I believe you said the atmosphere we work with to create will serve as the backdrop for your memories. That really, I felt moved immediately. The atmosphere we work with to create will serve as the backdrop of your memories. Can you say more about that?
Sure. I think that there's so many things where we design and create, and so much of it is not necessary, right? If you're having a wedding, you need an officiant, you need rings, and there's so many necessities in the world of events. But in the luxury world, there's so many things that we create and we design that are not necessities. But there's so much of that creates a feeling. And I always feel like I did a successful job when we have a prototype or a sample. So here in our studios, we have 3 amazing large, they're almost like sound studios, but we use them visually. So we can, put a backdrop up and put furniture in there and hang a chandelier or hang a ceiling treatment and show tables to really explain to clients what they're going to see visually as a mock-up or a prototype for their event. And when clients don't want to leave that room, so we've clearly gone through all of our checkboxes that we need to discuss and go through the proposal and went through every visual step of the job in the event. And we're still sitting there chit-chatting or having a great time, and you just see them immersed in this environment. I feel like we've done a successful job. And I think that also translates to the day of, because now that extrapolated times 100 or 50 or 300 based on the scale of the event is now an environment you're not just creating for a family, but you're creating for every one of their guests too. And that creates a feeling and evokes a sense of belonging to wherever we've transported these guests to be.
Since you're listening to this podcast, it's obvious that you want to find new ways to improve your wedding business. And that's why I'm so excited to tell you about the Book More Weddings Summit. During this online conference, which is free if you mention my name, you'll learn how to more easily book more weddings by hearing from over 20 industry experts, including my past podcast guests, Heidi Thompson, host of this event, and Julie Novak, CEO of Party Slate, along with more. Attract your dream clients, stand out from the competition, and make more money without working more hours, and sign up for this online conference August 22nd to the 26th, which again is free if you mention my name. Register for this free ticket at bookmoreweddingssummit.com/Andy. That's bookmoreweddingssummit.com/Andy. And you also talk about, unconventionality in terms of transforming the landscape of event design too. I love that too.
Yeah.
What about that?
So actually, I would consider him probably one of my greatest mentors. Bill Heffernan, who started Heffernan Morgan, he's the H of HMR Designs, is still on our team today. And he's just such an incredible visionary and an amazing guy to work next to and alongside. And he's always been such a believer in editing and such a huge believer in unconventional materials. So, we oftentimes will brainstorm and pull out a Uline catalog, which is kind of one of my most favorite places to look, and get inspired by the colors of zip ties that are on page 67. And all of a sudden now we've designed an entire party on zip ties. So I think there's something so artistic and almost like an art installation that events can take, and not necessarily weddings, but, generally mitzvahs or corporate events can really take those risks and do something really fun with. But I think there's also very hard to differentiate yourself when you're working with the same medium that, 5,000 other people in the US are also working with. So we've always felt like taking a trip to Home Depot or, browsing that catalog of Uline has always been so interesting to figure out, how do we be creative? How do we push the boundaries of conventional design to unconventional and do something really breathtaking that's different?
Yeah. I would love if you could tell a couple stories that help illustrate, what you've been talking about so far. Like you mentioned 50 to 60% of your business is weddings or social. If you could maybe pick a wedding that might be a favorite of yours or that, so excited about, inspired by. And then if there's maybe after that, we could do a corporate one. But you have an example then where you kind of talk through the process and even from the beginning, Rishi, like from the moment of meeting the client and what your process is in order to create this for them.
Sure. I always feel, and I'm sure you've heard this before, that a first meeting is not only for a client to interview you, but it's almost for you to interview a client. And I'm grateful that at this point in time, we are able to, more so select the clients and the events that we want to do versus the ones we have to do. Because I do feel like, again, we talked about the experience and the journey that every event is with a client, whether it's a 6-month period or an 18-month period, where it's an investment on their end and on our end. And we want to make sure that we're working for the best people who also want to work with us and not just shopping around or feel like they're forced to work with us because they had no other choice. So I think that's the first part. And usually we start with an initial phone call and really kind of gauge what the scope of the event is, make sure they're paired with the right person internally based on availability and style and, venues, et cetera, et cetera. And then once that happens, we usually schedule a first consultation where we'll kind of have a brainstorm session, just discuss big picture ideas and concepts where inspiration can be brought to the table. We can kind of go through our portfolio if anything, makes sense, or if it makes sense to kind of explore, here's a wedding at the Four Seasons. This is how we set this room up. Do you like this? But, very much more big picture design. And after that, we try and formulate something which we call a proposal estimate, which then gives the client a very brief budget breakdown of what we think their event will run from a financial standpoint, along with some visuals in terms of mood boards and aesthetic boards that we can put together to just make sure that we're on the right page. After that point, we generally ask them to commit with us, where we would ask for a commitment letter and date deposit to hold the date and secure our services, from which we can then move into two different options, whether we do a full sample or if we have them in again, if the scope of the job is pretty big, we'll have something called another design meeting where we'll have floor plans and maybe some renderings and floral and some props pulled to really take a look at. One really great, amazing thing about our new facility that we've been in now for 2 years is we have this amazing, almost 40 by 40 room that's called our design atelier, that we have one of many things of our inventory that we can pull clients in there and show them, here's the fabric we were talking about, or here's this pillow, or do you like this crystal candlestick? And it's a really great way for us to be able to sense their instinct as well as their initial reaction to something. So if I've now in my mind designed a party with all cut crystal, and I think that's what they're going to love based on something we talked about, and I go into our atelier and show them a cut crystal vase, and they're like, no, that's not what I'm thinking. I already know now. I've cut 7 steps out of the process because we're able to really narrow down their likes and dislikes, which is a very big challenge because it's kind of like mind reading sometimes, but it's something we've kind of accustomed to becoming very good at. And then generally after that point, we will do a full sample where look at linens and flatware and stemware and centerpieces and large design elements where we'll make any final tweaks and changes. Possibly have a meeting or two after that where we, wrap up any fine details such as bouquets or, any additions or walkthroughs, and really then you're at event day. So I think that's kind of more or less the general process, but every event is different and every job is different. So I think it just depends.
Can you give me one example of specifics of how you manifested their vision and, you applied your process to it? Just some details, some specifics.
Sure. Actually, it was a couple of years ago, one of my sweetest clients. I actually become very good friends with them now, and I absolutely adore them. They came in, and I had never worked with them before. They had worked with one of our competitors for their children's mitzvahs, and it was time for their first daughter to get married. And I had done her best friend's daughter's wedding, and she had come to me because of that. We sat down, we met, had a great meeting, and just felt a good vibe. However, I did feel, I was like, this is not a done deal. I feel like she is just interviewing me, but I really did like her. So we had scheduled a design meeting, had her come back, and I had went to the market, bought some flowers, came up with some really interesting concepts in design, and presented them to her and say, here's what I'm thinking. I think let's do a ceremony like this, and it's beautiful, and blah, blah, blah. And we come back and the reception's completely different. And while guests come into the ceremony thinking the whole wedding is going to be a white and green wedding, the reception doors open and it'll be fuchsia. And she just loved it. She brought one photo of inspiration. It was all it was. That kind of catapulted in so many different levels. And really, the event at the end of the day had nothing to do with that photo, or really didn't look like that photo at all. But it was interesting to see what she grasped from that. And I think the only similarity to the photo she had brought in were chair jackets, these beautiful custom chair jackets that we had made for the backs of chairs. But really, it was such a cool experience because that second design meeting that we had with her, she felt so appreciated and heard, and really felt like we did our job, which ended up giving us the opportunity to work for them and the family, who, like I said, have again become great friends and really great clients. And, after that, we did do a full sample where we had them come back, and we did a full sample, really honed in on exactly what the design would be. One of my very few samples that almost nothing changed, because usually there's always some small tweaks or changes, or there's budget issues, or there's this, or there's that. This was one that almost had nothing changed, which was awesome because I felt like I was able to understand them, and they felt like I understand, and they were able to understand me, which was an amazing situation.
Yeah. How about a corporate job that you did, and some details about that?
So I think we actually recently did an amazing party for Radio Flyer, the wagon company. We just celebrated their 100 years of being in business, which is an amazing feat and milestone for the company. And they had worked with a planner here in Chicago. They had hired or actually bid on the event. And the planner had called us in to kind of help with the creative of how we're going to design and produce and come up with a story. And I think, it is our job to tell a story with clients, whether it's a corporate client or a private social client. And in this situation, it was telling the story of a brand that has so much rich culture and tradition and means so much to almost every American in the US, which was kind of we felt like we had a big job to do. And we brainstormed with them, and they have such an inspiring facility here in Chicago. They have these really cool, illustrated business cards, and it's really state of the art, but still has this element of whimsy and, playfulness, which was kind of inspiring to me. So us and the planner kind of put our brains together and said, let's create this world and this design and party, which was actually in their backyard, quote unquote, of their facility, which was kind of a big, grassed courtyard almost. We put up a tent, and we said, in this tent, let's create something that was almost something that we as adults see as 3D, a 3D world, realistic, to something a child sees on TV or in a book as a cartoon, which is 2D. So let's figure out this way to blend a 2D and 3D world together. So we'd have animated things as well as 3D things through the entire tent. And let's take the perspective of a child, riding their tricycle down into the park. So we had a sidewalk and all these amazing things. So we did some sketches, had worked with an amazing illustrator renderer who came up with some renderings of our ideas and presented it to a client. But the way we presented it was really cool. We actually ended up building here in-house with our art team. We made a custom, all this black and white line drawing artwork that would facilitate as a coloring book for the adults to bring back home to their kids after the party. But we took the pages of that coloring book and created this big 4-foot tall by 4-foot by 4-foot box that was delivered to their facility. And when the lid was taken off of the box, all four sides of the box opened up and 100 red balloons came out with the proposal and our design deck, including the bottom, which really kind of, started the process and which actually awarded us the job. And that they were so proud of it and happy with the results of this. And the coolest part was at the bottom, there were 3 red Sharpies with the proposal and it said, just add color, which was kind of the concept of the whole party of taking this 2D world and bringing it to a 3D adult party. So, it was a very, very cool, and they actually showcased it, I think, in their main lunchroom, which is right off their lobby. It was a very cool way to start the process. And kind of from that, we gained the trust and the knowledge that we understood what their brand was and turned out to be an amazing experience with them.
Yeah, I love how you presented that. So I'd like to transition over to the business aspect, of what you do, Rishi. And first of all, I'm wondering, it sounds like 7-8 years later, you had worked your way up to being president. And I'm curious how you think that happened. I mean, I'm sure people would love to know, how do you... Because that's really fast tracking in a sense. I mean, I know you're very talented, you're gifted, but are you able to speak to any part of that, how that occurred so quickly that you would get to that point?
Sure. So actually, I'm the CEO of our company. Our president is Bob Mertzleft, who's actually when I started, he's the one who hired me. He was the owner. So when I started as working and I kind of worked my way up, I came to a turning point where I felt like I needed to either continue working with the firm I was, but have a partnership in the business because I also have always the world of entrepreneurship. And while building my own name would be, so let me backtrack a little bit. When I started in the business, Bob really invested in me and believed in me where others that I did meet with and interview with didn't believe in me. And I'm a very big believer in karma and doing the right thing and being honest, which, I've learned it doesn't come that often in this industry either, but it's very important to me though. And I could have left and started my own thing, but I felt like that was a really bad thing to do for somebody who did believe in me and was the one who was able to establish who I am in this industry. So I had a very frank conversation with them and said, I would like to, move to another market and do something or stay here, but I need to, further my career and make sure that this is a place for me. And I would love to talk to you about being partner. And, we had that discussion and I became partner and now I'm CEO of the company. But really what I'm doing today is just more amplified with a title than what I was doing before I became CEO. Many decisions from what we were doing as a company and where we were going and who we were hiring and how we were, what our next steps were kind of in discussion with me. I wasn't at the helm of making all of those decisions on my own, but I was still kind of integrated into it. So when we officially changed my title to CEO, Bob and I believed that that was probably the best route for us and for me to kind of be the leader of our team, but also client interface wise, I have kind of become the face of our company too, which has been a great thing to kind of catapult and really actually give all of our other designers so much more leverage to be able to pull me into a meeting and have me be part of it and help them close and sell jobs as well. So that's kind of how that started. I really, in many ways today now still sell and design events. However, I've tried to focus on, just a certain amount of events a year because I can't possibly run a business and be able to sell unlimited amount of parties and events and stay sane, I guess, at the same time. But really today, day to day, I really help manage and oversee our sales design team, kind of our revenue, our finances, with our CFO, obviously, who's, taking care of a big part of that. But really also operationally, Bob, who's our president of the company, he kind of oversees a lot of our operations and logistics. So we kind of work as a team to be able to tackle all that is to tackle for a company our size.
Well, and it sounds like you're creating like lanes almost to work in, right? And to be very clear, to split up those responsibilities. It's sounding to me like that's a big part of it too.
100%, because I think if those lanes weren't created, then you have drivers driving everywhere kind of blind as well as kind of with no destination. So I think by creating those lanes of saying, I'm going to focus on this, this, and this, and I want you to focus on this, this, and this, even though cross-functionally we have a lot to do with both, we need to really keep that sense of ownership and focus in mind so that we can have goals and achievements, and our team as well, because it is so big, then also understands, who's making what decision and where is that coming from.
Well, and I'm also thinking back to how your experience, I'm going to guess ironically with Goldman Sachs in finance and accounting, must help you tremendously as a CEO in a company like this because that's a place where a lot of us, artists, fall flat, is being able to deal with the numbers, not only to understand them, but to also embrace them.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. I'm so grateful that I did take the route, even though it led me to a totally different area than I'm in now of my life. I think just even the finance and accounting education and my MBA in finance from Indiana really, really, really helped me understand how businesses are run, especially when it comes to, breaking apart and restructuring businesses, which we did, I did that after school. Working with mergers and acquisitions really helps formulate in a company how things need to be run and operated and what needs to be added, what needs to be removed, where areas are too heavy or not too heavy. But the ironic part of this is I'm, again, very grateful that I have that side of the brain, but I also have the other, which is the creative side, which ends up being a very big distraction sometimes based on what I'm working on, which almost makes me feel like I'm a little ADHD to refocus on if I'm doing creative and design and all these really interesting organic projects, and then having to focus on finances. Like it almost takes 30 minutes to transition my brain from one to the other, but I'm grateful to have both.
Well, and I'm going to go personal for a minute too, because I'm thinking about, we're also talking about, like you're just saying right now, balance with how you're dealing, with the work. What about between personal life and business? I'll tell you, Rishi, it's interesting. So there have been, I've asked a lot of women on the show, because I think it's really important, is, who, for example, are raising a family. I mean, this could be whatever, you're in a couple, whatever it is, there's a lot to balance with personal life. But I also ask particularly in terms of having kids and how do you balance all of that? And I know that you have a fairly new daughter, right? A couple years old, something like that?
Yeah, she's almost 2. Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I think it's something that every day you feel like you got it, and then the next day you don't. So I think it's really trying to, I've now realized that the events that I take on have to be extremely profitable, and they have to bring me a lot of joy to do them. And if those two things don't check out, it's not worth doing. And frankly, because when I do an event, I put my all into it, as does everyone on my team too. And I want to make sure that if I'm going to be spending X amount of time away from my family and my daughter, that it is for something that's going to be well worth it, versus, doing an event and feeling like I didn't get enough out of it. And now I've not even spent the last month with my family because of this event. So, that's something that's really important. And of course, I don't have a crystal ball, so very hard for me to be able to predict those things up front. But I think just understanding that took me a while to say, okay, I need to come up with some metrics and ground rules. I'm going to be at work from X time to this time, spend this time unplugged and this much time at home every week working, So I think just kind of coming up with a good balance to be able to be present, which is also very hard in our industry because we almost need to be on call many times for many clients, almost any time of day. But kind of setting those parameters and boundaries, I've learned and continue to learn as I evolve and develop, is very important for a work-life balance.
Yeah, no, I like what you're saying. You have to take that kind of an attitude and perspective to the personal side. We got to really, like you say, I like that what you're talking about, boundaries. There has got to be boundaries on both sides, and so I like that. What about the changes that you have seen since you first came in? There's been a lot going on since you started in 2010. What are some of the biggest changes you've noticed since you first got into the events industry?
I would say, I think we kind of touched on this earlier, but social media has really completely changed the industry. I think it has turned into something where parties, and us being in the Midwest, there is a lot of wealth in this area of the world, but it's much quieter than the coasts. So not only from an aesthetic standpoint, where clients might not be as open to taking risks as they would be in New York or LA, they still do spend quite a bit of money. And a lot of things that we used to do were much more under the radar, as well as kind of maybe our company too. And I think as social media has grown, a lot more things are apparent to the entire world instantly. So even from a planning perspective, if planners who used to have a great book of, vendors for this, and this, now are completely exposed to their entire quote unquote secret list the moment they do a party. Whether they don't post all the vendors, someone else is bound to post a photo that might list all the vendors, or you can check on geotags and see anyone else who posted from that party. So what's happened is I think it has created a lot more transparency in the industry, which I don't think is a bad thing. But as a creative for us, it's made us stay on top of our game from a creative perspective. Before, back, when I started, if we created a new prop or a new furniture design or this or that, or created this amazing party, we would kind of keep a lot of those photos to ourselves for a year, a year and a half before we would start using them in marketing or, anywhere else. And now what we found is it's more important to get those photos out first, if it's because someone's bound to see it otherwise, and knock it out. Yeah. But it's really kept us on our game because we have to be so creative and not just thinking about our events this year. It's about thinking about the clients you're meeting with for next year and making sure you're not even remotely repeating anything, even though there's no client interaction or crossover. But the client that's hired you for 2020 is watching all the parties you're doing in 2019. And, they don't want anything to look like 2019 if their party's in 2020. And I think that's a really big challenge for us as designers and creatives to stay fresh and interesting and new, because so much is available instantaneously. I think that's the biggest thing that's changed in our industry.
Well, before we end, I actually want to kind of, for a moment, I think this is going to be fun. I want to go back toward the beginning when we were talking about your trip through Europe and Asia and taking those 2 months to just try to figure out what you want to do and just take off and see what's going on in the world. And it affected you so much and clearly had a lot to do with who you are today, at HMR Designs. And I'm sure obviously your personal life too. Is there any one particular story that we could close on that still really affects you to this day from that trip, where it could be something that really moved you, some kind of an experience, a story of what happened on that trip that really stays with you now and helps keep you grounded?
Actually, I think there was part of that trip when I was in India and I went to a temple and met with, a large saint that kind of runs a massive organization, and just had kind of this sense of belonging when I, kind of explained, here I'm at a crossroad in my life and don't really know what I'm going to do. And all he told me was to follow my heart. And I think I've always said this in the past, that I've believed I'm a true artist at heart. That's where my inclination always goes to. That's where happiness really comes for me. And I think that's the importance of being in a creative, ever-changing industry like this. But looking back on that 10 years ago, like, wow, was he right? I don't for any time in the near future foresee me jumping to another industry anytime soon, but I do really feel like I landed where I belong.
And isn't it interesting how hard it is for us to sometimes to follow our heart? It's often the hardest thing to do.
And especially when it's, comes at a point where you have no choice due to financial climate or just strictly finances, or you have to make ends meet. We need a paycheck at the end of the day, and are going to take on events and jobs even now that are not going to yield you the most satisfaction that you want from every event that you do. But we need to put food on the table and we need to make a living for ourselves and our families. So yeah, it's a very interesting catch-22. And I'm sure you've heard this from many in our industry too, that I feel like it's, feast or famine. We are either so busy that we can't take any more on, or we're so hungry for work that we're so terrified where our next paycheck is going to come from. And I think that's kind of a very real way to look at the industry too, because it's so unpredictable.
It is now. It is a roller coaster. But this has been incredible. What is the best way to find out more about you and also about the company?
I think stay on track. I hope you can, follow me on Instagram. My personal page is Rishi the Designer. Also, obviously HMR Designs. It's our business page. We've really taken a thorough effort in making sure that we're posting real up-to-date content of real events and recent events and creating stories. We're working with Vanessa from Two Paper Dolls, who's amazing, we just kind of did a soft rebrand this year as we're celebrating 40 years and creating a new website too, which we're excited about. But I would say stay with us on social media. You'll get to learn a lot about us and where we're going and what we're doing.
Well, Rishi, this has been such a pleasure. I'm so glad we caught up, and thank you for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Andy. It's great speaking with you, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you for listening to this re-release of an earlier episode on the wedding biz. If you enjoyed it, please share it with 3 friends or colleagues who you think would also benefit from hearing it. And follow us on Instagram and Facebook at The Wedding Biz. We'll catch you next time on The Wedding Biz.